The truth is out there.
It is one of the world's greatest mysteries, Scotland's legendary Loch Ness Monster. So does the lake creature actually exist? Well, if you ask one man, he'll tell you it is in fact no myth.
Every day it's flaunted in front of your face.
Hundreds of people in the valley say they are hearing voices in their heads.
You just choose to ignore it.
Belief can be a powerful force. No one knows that better than the people who are sure they've seen Bigfoot.
Real accounts.
He says he knows who's playing mind games.
Rogue government officials that are sponsoring this, also corrupt business officials, and private citizens.
From real people.
Hundreds of people turned out tonight for the unveiling of a very controversial statue.
Yeah, it really is. The Satanic Temple of Detroit revealed the 1-ton bronze statue.
It's time for you to take a swim.
I'm just excited to see my Lord and Savior Baphomet represented in such glorious Italian stone. I do hope his eyes gaze upon me, and that my allegiance is recognized.
In the dark waters.
The Dark Waters channel is for entertainment purposes only. Although information in these stories can be traced back to relevant and true sources, Dark Waters strongly discourages its viewers, listeners, and subscribers from visiting the site of incidents and encounters discussed or revealed on the show. In other words, we will not be held responsible if you are attacked by a Dogman, molested by a Bigfoot, bitten by vampires, chased by chupacabras, abducted by aliens, accosted by the Men in Black, investigated or arrested by the local law enforcement, CIA, FBI, NSA, EPA, BLM, or another alphabet group, whether on U.S. soil or abroad. Thank you for tuning in, and enjoy the show.
Back from his hiatus, Dark Waters returns to present tonight's episode of Bigfoot Bonanza. In another historic move, the Dark Waters channel has joined forces with Lon Sticklers of Arcane Radio and owner of Phantoms and Monsters to bring you 3 Bigfoot encounters from Alaska. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the best horror narration that YouTube has to offer.
A few years ago, my brother Alan and I went moose hunting up in the Locket River. It was late September. Back then, the moose hunting season used to be about 30 days long. My friend Mitch, who worked at the Bethel Hospital, decided to tag along for the trip. He was having a rough time at work and needed a mancation. It took most of the day, in our small boat at least, to get up to the Locket River, and we camped pretty close to the kill bucks. The following morning, we were awakened to a sound of a bull grunting upriver near one of the inside feeder streams. So, having heard that, the two of them went to investigate while I went the opposite direction, further downstream from our camp. My brother said that they could hear a bull grunt and rake brush occasionally, and despite their best efforts to coax him out, he didn't show himself. Meanwhile, I stepped to the edge of the clearing on top of a high ridge and hid myself in brush to watch the river and clearing for animals. I'd been there about 30 minutes when something began walking across the clearing, but it was walking upright, like a human. Well, my first thought was that this was a moose or a bear, but as it came closer, I couldn't really figure out what it was. I could see the upper part of the body, the head and the shoulders, way above the tall grass, and when it reached higher ground, it walked with a side-to-side sway of the body, just like a person does when climbing a hill. Trying to rationalize, I figured it might be another hunter, but as far as we knew, we were the only ones in the area, and no other hunters or camps were even below us. Now, the odd thing about this person was that it had reddish hair all over its body. The morning sun glistened off of its head and shoulders, almost like it was sweating. It moved gracefully and was only a couple hundred yards away. Then either Mitch or my brother broke a dry stick when they was walking back down to camp. The noise of the breaking stick was loud during the calm of the sunny morning, and it carried through the air. This thing suddenly straightened up and froze. looking in the direction of the same sound. A few moments later, it sidestepped slowly towards a couple spruce trees, maybe 18 or 20 feet away, and it stopped between them, just standing still. It stood there cautiously, just out of sight, searching for the cause of the noise. After watching this thing for a while, I realized that it was like nothing I had ever seen. I began to feel a little uncomfortable, so what I did was slip out of my hiding place, and I quietly walked back to camp. Now, when I told my brother I had seen some kind of animal, he got excited. He thought that I might have seen a moose instead. So, we all went to check that spot, but it was nowhere to be found. In fact, we saw no wildlife during our hunt, so we all headed back to civilization.
Hello, this is Penny Dreadful Moment, YouTube horror narrator, and I swim in the dark waters.
Beware the kushtia. About 4 years ago, while I was a senior in high school, a few friends of mine were over at my house. Our neighborhood was on the side of a mountain and surrounded by a forest. As with most teenagers, after a while we got bored with our video games and TV, so we all decided to walk a trail in the woods. This is about 3 a.m. Yes, I know this is dangerous, but we weren't worried about running into bears because it was their hibernation time. So we gear up for the 0-degree weather and leave for a trail up the mountain. I had been playing on this trail my entire childhood, running through the woods, building forts, just doing what kids do. So, of course, I knew it like the back of my hand, and I wasn't too worried or afraid at all. We had crossed a bridge onto the trail and walked about a half mile when my friend stops and says he heard something up ahead. In an attempt to comfort him, I say, "It's just a deer or something." Having seen much of Alaska's wildlife in these woods, I was truly confident that is nothing to fear. So we keep walking, and by this point, he's nervous. His eyes were dancing in his head, looking up and down, left and right. My third friend started to say it was probably the kushtia, a local legend of a creature that shapeshifts into something that lures you to your death. He freaks out even more, and I tell him, "Listen, I've spent half my life in these woods and haven't seen one thing that was remotely strange." About 5 minutes later, we heard snow crunch under a huge pine tree about 10 yards in front of us, stopping us dead in our tracks. Looking up the path towards the trees, we shine the flashlights in that direction and we catch a flash of something move behind the tree. It looked like a bike reflector or something, so we slowly started backing away from the tree, moving back down the trail, our eyes locked on that tree. Then we see a hand from behind the tree touch the ground and I stop dead, frozen with fear, shining my flashlight directly on it. It took a few seconds for my friends to realize what I was looking at. My friends who had been scared this whole time goes nuts and starts trying to speak, but nothing but gibberish is coming out. Whatever was behind the trees leaned out to look at us. Its eyes reflected like a dog's from the beam of my flashlight, making its face blurry from the glare. Instantly, we all run, not daring to stop. No movement was heard until we had reached the bridge when one of my friends fell on the ice. That's when I heard it bounding up the path towards us. Shining my light in the direction of the sounds, it is running towards us on all fours, half screaming, half howling. It looks almost like a human, but seemed to be a lot taller and skinnier. Its body looked pale in the moonlight and against the snow, and it was completely naked. Scared out of my mind, I jumped off the low bridge onto the frozen creek and yelled for my friends to follow me. We run down the side of the creek towards my neighborhood. The entire way, I could hear whatever it was following us through the woods directly to the right of us. This thing followed us all the way until we got to the streetlight by a children's park. To this day, my friend and I still bring up crazy theories of what we had seen, but my other friend, the one who had been so terrified, refuses to talk about it.
Hello, this is the Vault Keeper. Come visit us at the Vault of Nightmares on YouTube. And we enjoy swimming here in the dark waters. Be safe.
I grew up in rural West Virginia. The property we lived on had been in my father's family for generations and was surrounded by hundreds of acres of woodland. Overall, we were a traditional American family. My sister and I were raised to respect our elders and not to question our parents. Likewise, our parents stressed the importance of education, success, and loving one another. My father was what you would call a handyman. He didn't have the best education, but he could fix almost anything. And Mom, well, she was more of a homebody. She didn't really care much for traveling. Nowadays, they call those type of women homemakers. My parents used to talk about the Snowman. This was a terrifying spirit that lived in a hidden burial mound for most of the year. It would rise from the mound after the first snowfall and roam the area each night until the last frost. The Snowman was feared by the Myuu people who once lived here in the early 1700s. My father used to tell us this bedtime story about this great massacre of the Myuu people, where one night, not too far from our home, the Snowman gathered all the bodies and carried them to his hidden mound. He used to describe the Snowman to us, saying that he was tall and stocky with long white hair all over his body. And the most terrifying aspect was nobody had ever seen his face because it had this long white hair that draped down over its head. Now I realize how silly this all sounds, right? But we were warned not to venture out at night. And my house was kept quiet during the winter nights because we didn't want to draw the attention of the Snowman. To my family, this thing was serious. And it got even more serious one January evening about 8 o'clock. My sister and I were sitting at the table doing our homework when my dad suddenly rushed from the living room, grabbing his coat by the door and stepping out into the night. When I asked my mother what he was doing, she told me that he forgot to bring in firewood for the night, so he would be right back. However, no sooner than she responded to my question, my father bolted back into the door, grabbing one of the kitchen chairs and wedging it against the front door. Then he opened the cellar door, retrieving his 12-gauge shotgun and a handful of shells, and stood there with his back leaned against the wall nearest to the front door. He quietly said, "The Snowman. He's out there. The Snowman's out there." Excited, my sister and I ran up the stairs to the attic so we can get a better look out of the window. For almost 10 minutes, we noticed no movement. Then my sister said, Look in the garden." Man, there it was. It was huge, 8 feet tall. It would stand up, walk around a bit, then squat down and dig its hands into the frozen dirt. Then it stood up again and started moving closer to our house. Man, my dad was right. You could see no facial features. For a second or two, I thought it was going to come to our front door. Then it turned and moved back into the woods, and we never saw it again after that night. My dad is no longer with us, but my mom still is, and she continues to live in that old house. She says that she can still hear screaming at night, but she believes it's the spirits of the Myuu people killed by the Snowman.
Greetings, friends. I'm Mr. X Dreams. If you enjoy haunting stories of all kinds, why don't you stop by my channel tonight, where I regale you with tales of strange events from around the world. Immerse yourself in unique, true stories, chronicles of dreams and nightmares, and even the occasional original short fiction, all written by yours truly. Make sure you let me know that Dark Waters sent you. Now, we return to your regular scheduled programming. Enjoy your swim in the dark waters.
Lon, I'm writing about an incident my daughter and I had this past weekend. We were on our way home traveling south on Crane Lake Road, only a few miles away from the lodge we stayed in for the weekend. As we drove around a wide bend in the road, we noticed 2 tall, dark creatures walk out of the wood line and step into the roadway. Scared, I slammed on my brakes, stopping about 30 feet away from them. These creatures seemed to ignore us as they walked onto the roadway, barely giving us a glance. crossing directly in front of our car, and then in one quick step, they both leaped over the ditch and walked into the forest. In shock and afraid, I sped off, driving about a quarter of a mile as fast as I could, and once out of danger, I pulled the car over to collect myself. My 15-year-old daughter was sitting in the passenger seat with this shocked look on her face, paralyzed in fear. We both sat there for a few minutes, not saying a word. Then I asked my daughter, "What do you think those creatures were?" Immediately, she looked me square in the eye and said, "That was Bigfoot." Both creatures were 7 feet tall and massively built. I was surprised by the amount of dark, reddish hair they both had and how proportioned their bodies were to humans. I saw the face of one of the creatures briefly as it glanced at us. Its nose was very broad, but the rest of its face was similar to those you see on TV that are supposed to be cavemen. They walked upright like humans and didn't slouch. And yeah, I could tell they were both males. I've lived in this area my entire life and have never heard of anyone seeing Bigfoot. But my daughter, she's totally convinced that these creatures, in fact, were Bigfoot. While searching online, we found your website and wanted to share this story with you.